Hi friends, welcome back. This is lesson 3 of our Dreams of Joseph, our See the Light art project on the artist Marc Chagall. Hopefully you've watched lessons 1 and 2 in sequence so that you're caught up so that we can continue painting this dream sequence about the Old Testament figure Joseph. So let's talk about what you're going to need for today's lesson, and this is really what you're going to be using for the next lesson, lesson 4 as well. You'll need your painting so far. You'll need a bowl of water and some paper towels or napkins for cleaning your brushes. And speaking of brushes, you'll need an assortment of brushes, some that are flat, that have a flat edge, and some that are round. And you'll need a couple different sizes, medium and small, nothing too big. And then you'll need some paint, and we're using craft paint for this painting. Craft paint is found in small bottles that hold about 2 or 3 ounces. You can find them at any local craft or art supply store. And this is thinner than an acrylic paint, and so its liquid nature is really great for doing this type of painting, and the colors are really vibrant. Now, there's really only 9 colors that you need for this, but if you have an assortment of more colors, then that's great. But the colors that you really need to have are your 3 warm colors, which are orange, red, and yellow. Your 3 cool colors, which are green, blue, and purple or violet. And your 3 neutrals, which are black, white, and brown. And that's how I'd like you to set them up on paper plate palettes. Now, I love using paper plates as palettes. It's quick and easy cleanup, and you can see all your colors there. If you don't have as many paper plates, you might have to just do smaller dollops around. But in order to get this done right, I want to make sure I have all my colors out, but not too much because I don't want to waste. You can always refill. So since I'm putting 3 on each plate, spread them out like a Y. Keep them far from each other on the edge of the plate and use the center of the plate for mixing. So here's my cool colors. Now if you're working with other people, you don't need to have your own palettes. You can share as long as the palettes are in a central location where everybody can reach, and that you're all sensitive about where you're mixing, so you're not mixing where someone else has mixed a color. So you see that. So those 3 cool colors, and now my 3 warm colors. Great. So we learned that Chagall had a very strong faith. Now in the early 20s, he also had an opportunity to visit other countries, and he soaked up the flavor and colors of those other places. He traveled to Italy and Germany, and one of the places he traveled to was Palestine. And so when Chagall visited Palestine, the land that the Bible took place in, he was enthralled, fell in love with it, and felt closer to God than ever. After he returned to Paris from his trip to Palestine, he raved on and on to his art manager at that time and other artists about what he saw in Palestine and how connected he felt to God. Well, a friend actually commissioned Marc Chagall to do illustrations for the Bible. He heard his enthusiasm and thought he'd be the perfect candidate. Let me show you one right now. This is called The Binding of Isaac. You'll notice that the figures are outlined in black, and that they appear to be kind of relaxed and floating. Of course, you'll notice all that intense blue that Chagall loves so much, and the religious symbolism. Back to our painting. Marc Chagall did a lot of beautiful Bible illustrations, and so he was really trying to pick that point in a story that would really be compelling. And that's what we're doing here with our Dreams of Joseph, the story of Joseph when he first tells those first 2 dreams to his family after his father has presented him with this amazing ornate and colorful coat. Well, just like Chagall's art would get him into trouble as he had to flee Europe, being Jewish, his faith was getting him into trouble. So here we find out that Joseph, that beautiful coat, and his dreams were getting him into trouble. His brothers hated him. That's an awful place to be. But we want to make sure that we really show off this beautiful coat. Now, what does Scripture say? Depending on what version you read of the Bible, it either says many colored or ornate, but we don't have a real description of what it looked like. So you as the artist get to decide how to make an ornate, many-colored coat. You might want to start off with stripes or circles or some other pattern. So as I'm painting, please don't feel like you have to paint the way I'm painting. I'll give you some ideas, but it's your many-colored coat of Joseph. The idea is to make it very rich and colorful and not like anything you would see on a person walking around today wear, because this is our dream, right? This is part of a dream sequence, so it's unrealistic. So I'm going to start with the opposite of what I see here. I see a lot of blue and a lot of green. I want to do some other color, so I'm going to go with red. And I think I'm going to start with a nice broad cuff of red right here. Wow, that really pops against that blue. I'm taking my time. I'm using a flat brush so I can go right up against that black line. But don't be worried if you go over the black line, because we are going to come back in the next lesson to put in some black details. So just like matching the cuffs, I'm going to give a big deep hem on my robe that's red. Then it really pops against those other colors. Look at that. Now there's two ways you can paint this, friends. You can paint the entire robe one color and then paint over it if it dries a little bit, or you can do it in sections like I'm doing. So here I have a nice big red hem on the cuff of the sleeves of the robe and the bottom. There, I like that. I'm going to set that brush aside. I might come back to that. But I need some other big areas of color. So I'm going to take a brush, and I think I'm going to go with purple. Again, a color I haven't used yet. And to kind of define the robe area, you can either draw a line down the center, like where you would button. I'm going to give like an X kind of pattern here. I'm going to start up at the collar, that V shape. And then I'm going to just continue this like a big curved X. Now the idea, of course, is many colors. I know you're going to be tempted, my friends, to just do a couple of colors and be done. You're going to want to finish. Oh, I'm just ready to be over this already. But don't. Persevere. Can you imagine what it took Jacob and his wife to make this beautiful coat for Joseph? If it was that ornate and many colored, they didn't live near where you could get a lot of fancy threads or fabric. Now I'm just going to be mixing in other colors, adding in details. You do what you like, whatever colors you like. So you can make stripes or dots, however you want to embellish. I imagine it probably took quite a long time to make that coat for Joseph. It was given with such care and with love. Jacob loved Joseph so much. I'm sure Joseph appreciated it too, but the other brothers did not. But in order to make a very ornate coat, probably expensive, my guess is as different merchants came through, they must have been looking for different fabric or thread that they could use to make the coat, adding a little bit to it each time they got some new material. When you're a sheep herding family out on the hills of what we now call Israel, I can't imagine there'd be a lot of great fabric stores nearby. Okay, so I'm going to wash out my brush before I change color if I'm going to use that brush again. Remember, you not only swish in the water or run it under the sink, you also test it by squeezing it in paper towel to make sure it stays clear. So after you've added in some big patches of color, let's see, I think I want to make this central part of the coat a nice bright orange. Look at that. Look how that color just pops. Now you don't have to stay with big chunks of color. You can also create pattern, plaid, stripes, or one of my favorites, polka dots. So after I do this orange here, now I need that to dry before I add something like dots. You can really only create a pattern over an area that has already dried. Otherwise the paint will mix in, unless that's what you want. So here I have this nice orange kind of upside down V under these stripes. And my hem down here is already dry because I'm under these lights. So I'm going to use the very end of my brush. I'm keeping it vertical and I've dipped into the orange and I'm going to make some dots right along the bottom. Every here and there. And they're not all the same size. But because we read in Scripture that the coat was ornate, it wasn't. That's the opposite of plain. It probably had a lot going on. I'm going to do the same at the cuff. Those kind of some orange dots there. Since I'm already in the orange paint, now, what if you want to make a new color? What if you have all these great colors, but you've tried them all, and you really want to make a new color? Well, with paint, you can mix to make whatever color you want. So, for example, you probably know the answer to this already, but if I wanted to make pink, I would simply mix some white in with the red. So let's do that now. So you see I had my red brush. I'm going to take some white paint and kind of close by a little puddle of white. In the center, I'm going to use that for mixing. I'll scoop up some red and then bring in that white and mix together. White added to any color just makes a lighter value of that color or a tint of that color. But we happen to call light red, we happen to call that pink. Now you can probably think of some other colors that if you add white to it you could use. So let's just say I want to make a stripe of pink. Now that I've mixed that color. The more white you add, the lighter it will be. If you add white to the purple, it becomes lavender or just a light purple. Same thing with light blue, light green, adding white to it. What if you want to make a really unique color? Say I wanted to make teal. Well, teal is a type of blue-green. So if I were to go over to my cool color plate, here's some green, move it to the middle as a puddle, here's some blue, and then what I want to add to it is some white. I'll take a brush that's clean, bring over some white. Now when I mix those together, I make a shade of teal. So I have a new color to use in my many-colored coat. So I'd really recommend that you experiment making a lot of different colors. The idea, though, is to keep them bright. Nothing dull like shades of brown, things like that, because as we know, Chagall loved bright color. Oh, I love that teal color. Look at that. I think I'm going to fill in this whole area up to the cuff with that teal. That is great. So this is the part that's really fun for you, my friends. You're going to be filling up the entire coat with color. So you continue doing that, pause the DVD, and when you're finished with the coat, come back and join me and I'll be finished my coat. Friends, welcome back. Did you fill in your robe? Now, you don't have to have all the little intricate details. We can add that, but the color should be in there. But I noticed when I was filling in my teal, I have a really small space. So now I'm just going to use the same color but switch to a much smaller brush so I can get in there with my smaller brush to fill that in. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never seen anybody walking around in anything like this. Remember, we're not going for realism. We're going through for trying to get an emotion from the audience that's looking at this, where they will be intrigued and want to know more of the story. And that's what Chagall did. He wasn't trying to go for realism. He was trying to go for that dreamlike quality to get people interested in knowing the story. Take a look at this illustration by Chagall. This is Moses parting the Red Sea. And you see the figure of Moses is gold and much larger than all the other figures. So that's what we want to do here. We want to remember that this has got a dreamlike quality about it. Now, also, because we're not worried about realism, when we go to do the skin for Joseph, we're not worried about a realistic color. I mean, look at I in the Village. The peasant is green. And even the colors of this woman is like a ghostly white. Same, this woman has dots on her. So don't go with realistic flesh tones. Pick some other color. And I know that's really hard as young artists. You think a person's face should be the color of real skin. Well, if that's how you feel, start off with just orange, and then we're going to use a wet on wet technique with the paint to add a little white. But we're going to keep it more towards the orangey side. So I'm dipping into my orange, and I'm doing the face and the neck, and I'm going to do those mitteny type hands. We're not worried about those little details, and we're going to come back and do the black again. And then the feet. These sock-like feet that come from the bottom. Now, while that paint is still wet, the orange that we used for Joseph's face, I'm going to rinse out my brush, and I'm going to pick up some white. Here's some white here on my palette already. And since this is still wet, and then just on the side, I'm going to mix in some of that white. Same thing here, just like on one side of the feet, just so it's not so flat, so there's some dimension to the color there. So it's like lighter on that one side. Great. Now, what about the hair? Well, I bet you wouldn't be surprised to learn that I'm thinking that Joseph was a redhead, and I'm going to go with a dark brownish red. Of course, it's bright, and look at my hair. But you can make it anything you like. Bright yellow, bright green, light blue. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be realistic. The idea is that you're pulling someone into the story because they're intrigued by what you've painted. So I'm going to check my brush. Now, it still has some blue in there, so I'm going to make sure it's clean by squeezing it in the paper towel. And over here on my neutral, I'm going to pull just a little bit of brown, but mostly I'm going to pull the red. And I'm going to do my mixing over here. And I'm going to fill that in. Now, I went over some of the black. That's okay. We're coming back to redo black at the end. But since I've done the hair, I've noticed something. When I did my sky, there was a really fine little piece under the hair of the sky that I missed. So this is where it's good that I have my palette out with one of my smaller brushes. And I know I used blue right from the bottle. I'm going to very carefully go in to put the blue in so that my board color doesn't show under the hair, like that. Now, even though that's a pretty colorful robe, I think it's important that we put in some details, but it's still wet. So next time we're together, we'll add in some embellishments because that's what's really going to make this robe ornate. And it's easier to do that if your base colors are dry. You know, I'm looking at this coat, and I can only imagine what it must have been like for Joseph to wear this around. He must have felt so special, which is what his father wanted, right? Jacob was treating him special. Must have felt special and powerful and so loved and appreciated, and wow, that's pretty incredible for that time. But I can think of how I'd want to be clothed, and it's found in Scripture. It's in the book of Isaiah. I love this verse. Isaiah 61:10 says, I delight greatly in the Lord. My soul rejoices in my God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me in a robe of his righteousness, as a bridegroom adorns his head like a priest, and as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. See, for special occasions, people get very dressed up. And a bridegroom will dress very fancy, as you know. A bride will dress very fancy. And it's sometimes a symbol of something very special happening. Well, when we're clothed with the salvation of God, that is a very special thing. That means he sees us as so beautiful through his son, Jesus, and what Jesus did for us, the salvation that Jesus offers. And then we reflect back God's righteousness. That's what I want to be clothed in. Oh, it's fun to get dressed up in beautiful clothes, but to be clothed in the salvation of the Lord and in his righteousness. Now that is something special. That means when people look at you, they see the glory of God. Isn't that how you want to be known, as someone clothed in righteousness? I know I do. So when we get together for our last lesson on the dreams of Joseph, we're going to be adding in some of those small, fine details and finishing up in black. So I look forward to our next time together.